Okay, now I'm not sure if I want to include this as a regular segment of my videos, but as of yet, let's just say that this is going to be a once in a while thing for now. But anyway, I would like to welcome you to the Black Cat Book Club, for those of you who think I can't read. And I'm hoping to showcase some pretty good books, which means you won't see anything written by Stephanie Meyer, and you will also not see 50 Shades of Grey on here. Now, I've read that book, and it's as bad as you expect. So guys, if you feel you have to read it, approach it as you would a movie like Showgirls. Just skip to the sex. But anyway, the book we're talking about today is the latest book from the master himself, Stephen King. The book is called Revival, and it is a story about faith, religion, and the supernatural with a hint of Frankenstein included. In fact, King had this idea for the story rattling around in his head since he was a kid and cited both the iconic horror story and Arthur Machen's The Great Godpan as his inspiration for this story. The novel covers 50 years in the lives of two people, Charlie Jacobs, a man of God who apparently loses his way, and Jamie Morton. Jamie first meets Charlie when he arrives in his tiny Maine hamlet with his beautiful wife to become the town preacher. Almost everyone in town falls in love with the both of them. Things change all too suddenly when Mrs. Jacobs and her baby die in a really horrible car accident, which causes the good Reverend to give up on his faith and leave town. Jamie, meanwhile, grows up to become a rock musician, and yes, drugs are involved. Then one night, when he nearly ODs on heroin, Jamie encounters Jacobs again. Apparently, during the years since he left Jamie's main town, he had pursued careers as a faith healer, a sideshow huckster, and a mad scientist. Jacob saves Jamie by using electricity. As the novel drags on, Jamie begins to suspect that the former Reverend and his old friend have dark intentions and must race to find out how good or how bad the good Reverend's talents are. And as you all know, this will all lead to a really terrifying ending as only Stephen King can write it. As far as me and Stephen King books go, this is a guy that rarely writes a bad book. I think the only one that I kind of lost interest in was Duma Key. Other than that, the majority of Stephen King books I've read have been really good. And as I've said before, this is a man who rarely writes a bad book. There is like no limit to this guy's imagination, and he actually knows his readers, what his readers want, and makes sure that he does not disappoint. If I do decide to continue this segment, I probably will spotlight more books by King because I know I do want to talk about Joyland, another book he wrote in recent years that is really good, and it's another one I would recommend. So in short, Revival, really good story, and if you can find it at your local library or wherever else you might find it, check it out. And for this week's offering, I don't have a Stephen King book, but instead I have a very rare find, and it's by a movie director and screenwriter whose credits include the post-apocalyptic miniseries The Day After, as well as his work on the Star Trek film franchise, most notably directed the best Star Trek movie ever, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And that tied in with the fact that this novel is about Sherlock Holmes, and you have the 1974 novel The 7% Solution by Nicholas Meyer. No relation to Stephanie Meyer of the Twilight infamy, thank God. The novel, which is based on a lost manuscript that was written by the late Dr. John H. Watson, M.D., basically discusses the period between the Holmes stories The Final Problem, which ends with Holmes and Moriarty apparently dying together, and The Empty House, where Holmes resurfaces after a 3-year absence, and reveals that he has not been killed after all. In other words, the novel dismisses those Holmes stories as fabrications, and therefore sets out to tell the true story of the events covered in those two stories, which is known as Holmes' Great Hiatus. It still deals with Holmes accusing Moriarty of being this master criminal, but many of his accusations are dismissed due to the effects of his cocaine addiction. In fact, a good chunk of this novel deals with Holmes' recovery from his cocaine addiction with the aid of legendary psychiatrist Dr. Sigmund Freud. We also learn more about Holmes' connection to James Moriarty, including the fact that he was Holmes' mathematics tutor, and refers to a great tragedy in Holmes' life, in which Holmes' father kills his mother because she cheated on him, and then he killed himself. And it was because of the fact that Moriarty was the one to tell Holmes about what happened that he and Moriarty became mortal enemies. And it is revealed that it is an inability to face the tragedy that was what makes Holmes who he is. He uses the pain of the tragedy to aid him in his quest for justice, his fight against crime, and many of his famous eccentricities, including his cocaine habit. And in the end, the Great Hiatus was basically Holmes merely deciding to travel alone for a few years and telling Watson to tell everyone he was dead. And yes, folks, during the story, there is a mystery involved. In this case, it involves the disappearance of one of Dr. Freud's patients, and the case finds Dr. Freud teaming up with Holmes and Watson as they travel across Austria, as they try to stop a villain from starting a European war. Since then, there's been some movies that have had that plot, including the last Sherlock Holmes movie, A Game of Shadows. They succeed in only postponing the European War, and it is revealed that Holmes would be involved in World War I in 1914. As far as the 7% solution goes, if you have the 20th anniversary director's cut of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan that was released to DVD in 2002 and listen to the commentary by Meyer, he revealed that 7% solution was delayed due to a dispute with the Arthur Conan Doyle estate, but was finally resolved in time for the novel to be published in September 1974, and it was on the New York Times bestseller list until June 1975. In fact, it was even optioned for a film adaptation that was released in 1976, and it would be Meyer's first screenwriting credit before making his directorial debut with Time After Time, which is the Jack the Ripper vs. H.G. Wells movie in 1979, and then he followed that up with Wrath of Khan, and the rest, as they say, is history. As far as the dispute with the Conan Doyle estate goes, that probably wouldn't happen if the book was being published today because of the fact that Sherlock Holmes, the character, has now been released into the public domain, and has been for a few years now. As far as Sherlock Holmes goes, Meyer went on to publish 2 more Holmes stories, The West End Horror in 1976 and The Canary Trainer in 1993. To date, neither one got a film adaptation. So if you're a fan of Sherlock Holmes, or even a Star Trek fan, if you find this book on Amazon, you have got to check this book out. I was very fortunate that my library had this book, so I could do this offering for the Black Hat Book Club.